Welcome to the In Shape Fitness Show. I'm Coach Kim, and today's podcast is all about running. It's called To Run or Not to Run. Post New York City Marathon is a time of reflection for runners, but also for spectators, for people that haven't run, maybe haven't run this distance ever or haven't run at all ever, and are inspired by the athleticism, of course, which is apparent in pretty much everybody that endures the distance of 26.2 miles. And that is the distance of a sanctioned marathon. But the athleticism is just one part of it, because even for the fastest runners, the most experienced runners and athletes, running a marathon is also a really extreme mental endurance event. And so you don't really get one without the other. So to get inspired, because we've just come off the high of the last Sunday, which was November 4th, and the New York City Marathon running, the 49th running of the New York City Marathon in all 5 boroughs of New York City. I'm one of the coaches for a charity that's operated by the Roadrunners Club, which is the organization that puts on the marathon every year. And I've been coaching for almost 10 years, and I've been a runner since I moved to New York. I was not I was not an athlete or fit, actually, when I moved to New York City. In fact, I start the introduction of the book that I wrote about this is a funny story about how when I graduated from high school, someone I knew at the time said that my physical fate would be to, get married, have kids, and then gain. Basically, he suggested that my body would look like his mother's body by the time I started a family, because I was not at all fit. I was kind of doughy and did like the academic stuff. I was in student government and so on. But when I moved to New York, a walking city, a moving city on foot, it was very quickly something that I picked up with friends, a few people that I knew in New York, and I began to run in my late 20s, and I just turned 50, and I'm getting faster. I'm certainly a lot smarter when it comes to running for my own purposes. And of course, I try to get as many of my clients out to run. And then the third thing that I benefit from in terms of running is to coach this team for the New York City Marathon every year. And these adults that I train, and I'm going to tell a few stories about them because they are so inspiring, just truly remarkable, that I get the honor to work with them. Not runners, not athletes, not fast, but so dedicated to the activity as a sustainable health plan. And commit to the activity in terms of that, and in terms of the community that it structures around, and the amazing sense of enthusiasm that people have when we gather to celebrate the body's ability to move over such a long distance. So this podcast is about some of those stories. I call it To Run or Not to Run because we do get excited about it after the marathon in New York City every year. It's a huge event in New York City because it starts in Staten Island. The runners run through Brooklyn and Queens, into Manhattan, into the Bronx, back to Manhattan, into Central Park. It literally, there's very little of our city that doesn't have a reason to kind of cull around part of the route and really get excited. And so running is very popular at this time of the year in my town in New York, and I'm a victim of that enthusiasm as well. I've just gone out I ran actually by myself this morning, then I ran with a client, then I ran again by myself, and so it's a really exciting time to think about running. Then today there was an article in. Actually, it wasn't I guess it was a written article, but it was a small short video on the World Economic Forum website. I love all those promotional videos that the World Economic Forum does. And one of the amazing components of this reporting is about how running once a week can have a really significant impact on your longevity. on reducing your chance of early death. And we'll talk about what early death means in a little bit when I get to that part. So I am going to talk a little bit about the benefits of running and how sustainable it is in these tricky times of consumerism, where the economics of consumerism may be sort of still booming a little bit, at least for certain populations, and particularly in the United States. However, we're all confronting this notion of the sustainability of certain choices we make in our lives. And fitness is something we should be looking at through a lens of long-term sustainability. So I want to talk about that. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the component of the to run or not to run question that relates to your ability to actually, your physical ability to run. I hear all the time from potential clients, current clients who would like to run but claim they're nervous about potentially picking up the pace and hurting, running a little bit but hurting their bodies in the process. Running has a bad reputation for tearing the body down. And that is true in some cases, but it might be, and I'll talk about this when I get to that point, that it's a part of some of the inaccuracies that the inaccurate picture that's been painted about how running works, and also about how certain really simple adjustments that you can make in terms of warming up, in terms of strength building, not fancy stuff, but basic strength building that will offset the risks that you might be taking by picking up the pace and going from a walk to around the park to potentially a little bit of a jog. So we're going to start though with some stories, because the stories are the best, and the story that I want to begin with was also in the paper this week, and it is a story about an immigrant from Mexico whose name is Memo, who I got to take a glimpse at this piece. It was posted on the 1st of November, so over the weekend in the New York Times, and they called him the Marie Kondo of fitness. So I'm not into Marie Kondo. If you are, great. I still have a young kid in my home, and any feng shui and sort of minimalist living is futile at best when we have school papers flying all over the apartment, and it's just insanely difficult for me to keep myself organized in my home. However, they call this guy the Marie Kondo of fitness, with the basic premise that I write about in my book, which is that you don't need fancy stuff to have to enjoy or to adhere to a regimen of health. And this story was touching to me because, number one, it includes really basic principles that by which I live as well, in terms of not running with a GPS. I don't buy goos or fancy food tech for and supplements and things like that. I don't track a lot of my run sort of data points. I don't pay attention really to much of anything other than time, because I live by a fairly rigorous schedule. But this man named Memo, his real name is Guillermo Pineda Morales, and he's 46 years old, and he is placed among the top 10 marathoners in his age group globally. He ran a 2:28 in this year's Boston Marathon. That's the time that gave him this. This standing in terms of his age group globally, and that is fast. That is really fast for someone pushing 50 years old. So his story rang really true to my heart because of his age and because of his speed, but also because he is not going to be your guy sort of out promoting a particular gadget fancy footwear, fancy compression socks, Fitbits or GPS wearables, trackables or whatever. He is simply out there running. And the coolest part of it is that, to me at least, is that he's just a regular guy. So he works in a building in Queens, New York. He's a custodial staff member at a building apparently in Queens. And this is his activity that he's been doing since he illegally immigrated to the United States. Now, he's a United States citizen, but he only was able to attain that status after having lived here for some time as an illegal and then caught. And then, and this is all in the little video piece on the New York Times. So check it out. Memo is his name. And I was so inspired for my own purposes, just totally selfish for me. I wasn't even really supposed to do this on my job on the marathon day was, of course, I ran in wave 2. I was one of the runners with my team, and we crested the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, this really the northernmost point of our race course, and into Brooklyn. I ran into Brooklyn a bit, and then I jumped on the subway and hightailed it to Central Park on a very slow-moving local subway train. I almost missed the person that I wanted to see, and that was Memo, and but he did run by me about 2 minutes after I made my way into Central Park at mile 24, and I got to see him in person and take a picture of him so that I could show my young running daughter, and we just find that his story to be so incredibly inspiring. So that's the first of the stories. But the stories that are inspiring are not really all about fast runners, at least. The majority of the runners that I train are more like bucket list runners that are interested in. They raise the money for charity, because when you raise New York City's marathon, lots of the big urban marathons are very difficult to get into in terms of registration. You can't just go and sign up for one of these events. You have to, in many cases, enter a lottery. And then, I think 150,000 people put in for the lottery, and only, some 30,000 or so are selected to get an entry number to get admission to this race. However, there are a bunch of charities that participate in the event, and so you can sign up as a team member for one of these charities, and the Roadrunners Club operates its own. That's the one I coach. It's called Team for Kids, and you get to train with coaches like me for a period of 16 weeks, starting basically at Memorial Day every year and through the summer into the fall and through Marathon Day. And so this is the training program that we provide to our runners. And while in parallel to the training part of the experience, you're getting your friends to give you $20, $50, $100. Lots of companies match that money. So you accumulate a fundraising tally. And for Team for Kids, it's $2,620, 26.2, and then you get a guaranteed number as part of that program. And every year we have 2,000, I think this year 2,400 runners running in the New York City Marathon with our team. Most, as I say, are not fast runners. They are not like Memo, where they're top 10 qualifying, age group qualifiers in terms of their speed in this distance. They are marathoners that run a marathon in 3-ish hours, but very even few of those. Most of them are 4-hour marathoners, 5-hour marathoners, and some even 6 and 7-hour marathoners. And I had the incredible privilege of working with a couple of people this season that inspired me as a coach because of their sheer unbridled joy in this activity, coming to it the way that they have, with either in one case, this one young guy named Miguel, who is he probably carries a good 40 or 50 extra pounds of weight, but he was determined to begin to like set a new course for his physical life. And the reason that he wanted to do it this way was because it was connected to something bigger than himself. It was connected to the idea that when they raise this money for its Team for Kids, as I said to you before, it's money that's raised that then is part of a youth running program that is offered to public school students mostly throughout New York City, but in other parts of the country as well. And I have a kid in public school in New York City, and physical fitness is kind of the least of a principal's worries, the least of the Department of Education's worries right now. And that's really sad. It's actually rather infuriating to me. But the truth is, with this program, there is an augmented component of track, of a sort of slight competition among the kids in my daughter's elementary school. And so she gets to benefit from it. So Miguel's, interest in looking anew at his own physical health was married to his interest in doing something good for his community. And he wound up in our group running. His runs with our training program were at around 11 minutes per mile to 12 minutes per mile pacing. So very, very slow, but still, and I kid you not, it's some of the hottest days during some of the most ridiculously sweltering long runs, including some of our runs over multiple bridges. Central Park, which if you don't live in New York City, you wouldn't know this, but Central Park is very hilly, and if you run multiple times around Central Park, you're really taxing your body. And this man's smile, Miguel's smile, brightens absolutely everyone. And he ran his first marathon, and he did it this past weekend. And I just could not be more. I feel more honored to have worked with someone who has grabbed with gusto this particular event, this activity, running. Now, another one of my runners, just to show how hard it can be for some of the faster runners, we had a couple of runners that are good buddies that kind of egg each other on, and they're two of the fastest of the runners in our team, and they both barely broke in 3 hours, so they're just under the 3 hour mark at their fastest marathons, but they were looking to go a little bit faster, and it was a hard day for both of them. One of them did really well, came in at 3:05, and felt really great because it was his second fastest time for New York. However, the other one hit the wall at mile 20 and ended up running a 3 hour, I think 14-minute marathon, which was a disappointment in some ways to him, but he just really struggled towards the end of the race. And a lot of that has to do with the conditions of the day. The day was really, really beautiful, but unfortunately with what happens when the day is really beautiful, the beginning of the race can sometimes be a little bit too fast for people. And the New York City Marathon course is notoriously difficult in the second half. And so it is a time management piece that sometimes screws up even some of the best runners, because having a great first half is great. But oftentimes when you have a great first half, you end up struggling with the second half with the marathon. That's the mental part of that, the distance that can be tricky. So I want to tell you about one more runner, because this other runner that I ended up walking across the finish line with at, this was at right 7:30 in the evening. So by this point, we'd all been on our feet. I reported to work at 4:30 in the morning. That's how the logistics work for this race. So we'd all been out for, 12 hours, 14 hours at this point. And this woman was also running her first marathon, like Miguel. She ran in the slower pace group, like Miguel was as incredibly cheerful about running these intensely long runs in an oppressively difficult heat, like Miguel. And what happened to this person? Her name's Claudia, and I will thank her for the rest of my life, probably, for getting to participate in this experience with her, because it was so hard. She's already signed up to run again in 2020, and we're gonna bang it, sort of just put the experience of this year into the history books by knowing that we're going to really, really succeed next year. But what happened to her was that she twisted her ankle before she ever started running, before the beginning of the race. There was a water bottle in the start area, and she stepped on it weird and rolled her ankle, and decided to go ahead and do the race, to run the race. But within a couple of miles, she realized that there wasn't a way for her to run anymore. She just couldn't do it. And so she walked. And when she got to me at mile 24, roughly, by that point, I knew that she was having a really hard time. I didn't know the full story because I was only connected to my other coach, my fellow coaches, through text. But she was, by this point, limping really severely and crying. And so when I saw her, I got to see her and take her hand and put my arm around her, and we both cried. And then we shook it off, and tried to tell some jokes and say hi to some people and just, talk about stuff, because we were walking then 2 miles together, essentially. And we ended up walking across the finish line together with another coach, this other woman that I adore. And, and she made up her mind that she was just going to do this. She was going to make it happen. And it didn't matter that she was going to walk it, because her body wasn't going to let her run, but she was determined to make sure that she did what she was there to do. And that is so incredibly touching and inspirational for people that, no matter what kind of person you are, no matter what physical fitness you have now or you might want later, saying what you mean and doing what you say you're going to do are attributes of an amazing level of integrity, the kind of character that I want to be remembered as, and to live by, and just the kind of person you want to be around all the time. So those are my reflective stories about marathon weekend. And now I want to talk a little bit about running. So the sustainability, I'd mentioned that I wanted to talk about the sustainability of running. We can go back to the story a little bit, to Guillermo, because one of the reflecting on him as the Marie Kondo of fitness is a way to sort of jazzy it up a little bit. But it is so true that the industry, which is $30 billion a year of stuff that we don't need. And think about it. We want it. We want to know things like our pacing and our location, and we want to maximize our speed by using things like goos and compression socks and the best shoes and, the cutest gear and stuff like that. But running is free. You don't need anything to run. Running is free. You don't need anything at all. I have not really done this in my podcast within Shape Fitness, but I do this with my family. We have something we call no cent spent days. Because as a mom, I realized that, it seems that every other time, like I like in every other hour, you throw down your credit card or you whip out your wallet to purchase something. It could be something relatively small, but we just buy stuff all the time. And so I don't want to detract from the running part of it for a second, but running is free. I mean, it's a free way to run, to stay fit. So why would we not at least give it a shot? You don't need a treadmill. And here's something to think about. Fresh air, even when it's cold, is good for you. You're not going to catch a cold because you go outside when it's cold. So the old wives' tale about going out for a run when the elements are more challenging for the human body is just that. It is an old wives' tale. Running is free. Running when you as you get older and you think about the sort of the nuances of the way that the body works and how important it is to pay attention to to your physical fitness, to make sure. And I'm gonna talk for a second in just a minute about those health conditions. I said I was going to go back to this, but remember I said that the World Economic Forum has a piece out just today about the reduction of the chance of early death. And as you get older, these are things that you really have to work into your daily life, even though the World Economic Forum piece is about just going to go for a run once a week is going to improve your chance of living longer by whatever the percentage is. I don't have it in front of me yet, but those are components to think about when you're considering your choices for physical fitness. So running is free. Memo in the New York Times, this piece about Memo, Guillermo Morales, is so touching because of the sort of quiet, the soft-spoken, just like matter-of-fact, inviting mentality, like the relaxed sense of like almost a nobility of running with this very simplistic perspective. You're not going to see him obsessing over pace. You're not going to see him focused on, like what combinations of supplements and goos and special drinks, juices that he needs to concoct in order to maximize his performance levels. There isn't any of that extra stuff. He wakes up early. He runs whenever he can. His motto is work hard and don't give up. Work hard, don't give up. Two things. And there's a really funny story about the two things thing, but just go check it out on the New York Times. Just focus or Google rather Marie Kondo New York Times, Marie Kondo of Fitness New York Times, and you'll get to read about this really, really entertaining read this entertaining piece about a really lovely runner named Memo. Okay, I'm off that track, and I want to talk about a little bit of the science here, because this piece in the World Economic Forum is about some data that was accumulated over the last several years in Australia. It's not United States based, but there was a study, and it's published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, that has to do with the reduction of the risks of these things: obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, disability. So we'll talk a little bit about the ability to run in just a couple of minutes, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. I'm going a little long to do over this podcast as well. Hopefully that's okay with you, but I'm going to keep going. Obviously, you can turn me off and come back to this later. But the thing about running, the components of your overall health status. So it is reasonable to assume that participation in running is going to increase longevity. Scientific as evidence in terms of this has not been all that consistent. However, this pool of this sample, this data set included more than 230,000 participants. So this is a pretty big study, and only 10% of them were runners, and they tracked participants' health over a period of around 5 years to greater than 30 years, so 35 years. And then they pulled the data, so it happened over a long period of time. That obviously a number of their participants were deceased at the end of it, but they found that the runners had a 27% risk, or lower risk rather, of dying during the study period from the causes I just mentioned, compared with the non-runners. And specifically, running was associated with a 30% lower risk of death from heart disease and a 23% lower risk of death from cancer. Fascinating, right? Now, it doesn't even necessarily mean that you need to run more. Embedded within the study were data points on the number of times per week people ran. Once a week, 50 minutes or so, is a sufficient amount of time for the benefits to accumulate. Now, it also doesn't mean that you need to run fast. So I want to talk now, the last part of this was to talk about actual running. And the reason I want to talk about actual running, and the reason I called this To Run or Not to Run, is because we get excited about running, and then there's this thing about the start, like just taking the time to go out and do some running. There's a fairly significant change between one thing and the next, and oftentimes the enthusiasm to start running can quickly lead to injury if a proper foundation isn't acknowledged, maybe not necessarily built up to the best degree, to an optimal degree, but at least acknowledged, and therefore a warm-up / strength kind of component is a really good thing to do to prepare you for the act of running. And so the couple of things that I will say about starting to run if you are not a runner are these things. First of all, walking and running engage different muscles. They're two different gaits, and they're not the same activity. So walking fast is not the same thing as running slow. Because when you run, you lift up off of your heels and you flex the leg. You use your hamstrings and your butt to propel your body forward from your right leg to your left leg. It's almost like a controlled fall, in that to make it a running cadence, to bring your body from a walk into a run, requires that your feet are not on the ground at the same time, right? They're off of the ground. And so whereas with the walk, one foot is always touching the ground, right? So there's the difference. What I would say, if you're interested in trying to run but you're not a runner, is to not necessarily to walk, but to start doing some other activities besides walking that change the way that your legs work during ambulatory activity. So taking stairs is a really easy way to change the way that your body has to function when you're moving. To skip, skipping is actually one of my favorite activities to prepare for running. It's one of the drills that I do with every single person that I possibly can. Hiking and using hills, those kinds of things, that's also really, really helpful. And then there are things like marching, high knee marching, things like spending some time walking, but kicking your butt back or bringing your heel close to your butt behind you in order to flex your hamstrings. So those kinds of activities are really, really helpful in terms of preparing your body to move slightly differently than just walking. The other thing that I will say, the second tip, and I've only got 2 more tips and I'm really running out of time here, is to watch runners. Watch marathon runners. It's beautiful. There's another article that I was looking at in the paper today about how Kenyans always win everything, right, in terms of running. There were 2 Kenyans in the women's race in the New York City Marathon this year, first and second place. The one who won had never run a marathon before. She was out for the first time and competing against a veteran and beat her. And then a Kenyan won the men's division as well. And so there's this, there are different elements of the way that their lifestyles are constructed and the way that they train at high altitudes and all kinds of stuff like that. But just watch them run. It's effortless and beautiful. It's artistic. And it's important to see how the body moves because it will help you get inspired to not necessarily like pound your feet into the ground, which I think is what we tend to want to do, especially when we feel like if we're closer to the ground, if we stay as low as possible, we will protect our bodies. I think most people, as we become a little bit older, the risks of kind of leaving the surface of the earth increase over time. And so the idea of kind of gazelle-like movement of bounding through the air seems really, really risky. But it does turn out that the contact that you make with your floor, with your ground surface, with the road, is softened by the more effortless looking gait, as opposed to the pounding sort of away at the ground, the way sometimes neophyte runners run. So that's that. So watching runners. So moving the body in different ways as a sort of a precursor to being able to run through things like walking stairs, skipping, hiking up hills, and high knees and those kinds of things. Those are really great. Watching runners also really great. Foundational basics in terms of strength are also really, really important. And I have done a whole bunch of podcast workouts on AM Muscle Maintenance, the other podcast channel for In Shape Fitness. So if you need some core workout suggestions, go there or get in touch with me here through the podcast portal or through bodybyInShape.com. You can get in touch with me on social media. Find a way to get in touch with me, and I will happily put something together for you. And then the last thing that I want to make sure that you walk away with is some understanding that breathing is super, super important. And I'm going to go out on a limb and just throw this at you because it is complicated, but is really, really significant if you really want to adapt to running over the long term. And that is to inhale through your nose for 3 steps, exhale through your mouth for 2 steps. Now, this is for slow running. And remember, if you are interested in signing up for a race, if you're now a bucket list marathoner, you are interested in running a marathon, you're running to train at about a minute slower per mile than your expected marathon pace. So like if you wanted to run a 4-hour marathon, right, that's a little more than 9-minute mile. 9:07 minute mile. But your training pace is closer to a 10-minute mile. It's really, really important that you understand that difference. There are other things that you do during training, for different race distances, it's different. But for marathon, it is more about the accumulation over a period of a week in terms of mileage. And then you have these long runs that are never as long as a marathon, by the way, and are a minute slower than a marathon pace, by the way. And that's how you train the body. But the thing that happens if you begin to run in earnest is that your dominant leg, which in a non-conscious way, a subconscious way, you're going to plant your foot, your dominant leg down on your initial exhale step, which is why sort of 2 and 2 breathing pattern, inhale for 2, exhale for 2 steps, is not good for you, because most right-handed, right leg dominant runners will end up with chronic or overuse injury risk on the right side as a result of the accumulated mileage over several months. That is why I suggest to you, and again, I go out on a limb to try and get you to even think about this, because it's like tapping your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. You inhale for 3 steps through your nose, exhale for 2 steps through your mouth. So those are my 4 tips to run or not to run. To me is always an easy question. On some days I choose not to run, but most days I choose to run, and I love it. And I hope you try it. And if you do and you have questions, get in touch with me. I'm always here. Have a great day.